Hey guys, it's your boy Phil here, also Taco Phil. So just wanted to give you an update what's going on with me. I haven't really done any update videos in a minute. So I finally got back from Arizona after, it seemed like a month or so. I finished my certified flight instructor. Yeah, so I'm finally a flight instructor. Um, it was difficult. It was probably one of the hardest tests I did. But when it came down to the test itself, it actually wasn't super bad. So I'm gonna give you guys a few tips on what I did to pass my test and how I went through it. So first and foremost, if you did finish your commercial and your building hours and you are serious about it, flight instructor is a way to go because there is a lot of demand not only for flight instructors at schools that's slowly ramping up more and more, but there's also a good demand for independent flight instructors. I have like 3 students right now. I'm still working on getting more, and they all started off with guys who just needed help with ground. And so I'm just doing that, and they're all working on their private pilot certificate right now. Um, One of the hard things about doing flight instructor is, there's just so much information that you have to know. And it feels like you can't know it all. And the thing is, you really can't. Once you accept that, it'll actually go a lot easier for you. When I took my practical, it started off with 4 hours of oral, and then it only took me maybe about an hour and a half to do the flight portion. The flight portion was the easier part because he really didn't focus too much on what I thought he would focus on. Like when you're first in the right seat, you think, oh, steep turns. That's going to be the hardest. Well, he knows steep turns are hard for everybody, especially when you have so few hours in the right seat. So in mine, he didn't do any steep turns. So for my flight portion, we took off doing a soft field takeoff. Then we did one touch and go, doing a short field landing and a short field takeoff, which was kind of weird. So then we got up. He had me explain to him about how I would give him an idea of how I would explain to a student about leveling off, straight and level flight, climbs and descents. And he wanted me to, talk a little bit about integrated. And so he wanted me to, explain a little of how I would do these maneuvers and how I would explain to a student while in reference to instruments, which again wasn't a big deal. I'd gotten used to talking a lot and explaining what I was doing and conveying that information to my instructor. And then, so that was relatively simple. Once we got up, he gave me an altitude, and he was like, all right. He had me break down give me an idea of what you would teach to a new student. So we talked about slow flight, and we talked about doing some basic turns and straight and level, all that good stuff. And then he's like, all right, so show me. For him, he was like, get me in the slow flight. So we did slow. So I explained how to do slow flight, got us into slow flight. And instead of doing like a full stall, he wanted me to do a what we call a secondary stall. And so a secondary stall is basically a stall that you're going to do. You're going to do it at the first indication instead of a full brake stall. And then you're going to do demonstrate an improper recovery from that stall. So with a secondary power off stall, we basically got into slow flight, went ahead, pulled that power until we stalled the airplane. The first indication, we would put that nose down, right? Decrease that angle of attack to build up speed, and normally we'd put that power in to recover, right? So all we did was we basically took that power out, first indication of a stall, put that nose down, start building up speed, and then left the power out. So we did an improper recovery, pull that nose back up, stalled again, recognize we're in the secondary stall, go ahead, put that nose back down, power in, and then start retracting those flaps as we get a positive rate and recover from the stall. So we did that. It was a real quick, easy maneuver. After doing that, we did a Chandal, and Chandals are relatively easy, especially coming directly from your commercial. You may need to practice it once or twice, but it was pretty easy. Just had me explain to do the Chandal, and we did just one to the left, one to the right. As soon as we finished our one to the right, he went ahead and had me do a emergency descent. So he was like, oh, look at that, your airplane's on fire, what are you gonna do? So boom, I'm immediately going to go ahead and put that airplane into emergency descent, close my vents, go to my checklist, start doing my checklist. And so we did that, and then went into, all right, fire is out. So now we're going to go ahead and do an emergency landing. Went right into our ABCDEs, and real simple. Once we were down nice and low, we went ahead and recovered, and then we went into some ground reference maneuvers. We did 8s on pylons, and we did turns around a point. So again, not the most difficult things to do. What makes it kind of difficult is having to explain. You know, I'm so used to, as a student, just doing without super explaining. You know, maybe I'll explain, okay, let me set up for slow flight. I'm going to go ahead and pull that power. But I've never done it to the matter of which I am overtly verbalizing it and telling him, hey, this is what you're going to do. Make sure your ball is in the cage. Make sure you're at the pivotal altitude. So there was a lot more talking, and that was difficult. You know, when I first started, I could do the maneuvers because, you know, they are commercial maneuvers, so I had to do them on my previous check ride. But having to explain them while doing them, I was in the habit of first doing it, and then, or maybe beforehand talking about it and then doing it while not saying anything, because, you know, I didn't have that brain power yet to process while I'm doing it and explain what I'm doing. So you'll get used to that. You know, an easy way is just while you're flying, even if you're by yourself, talk to yourself, tell yourself what you're doing while you're doing it, and so you'll just get used to that. Then the oral portion wasn't that hard either, actually. The first thing the DPE told me, or the examiner told me, was you have all the resources at your fingertips. You know, use them. He wanted to see visual aids. He wanted me to tell him what I was doing and where I referenced stuff and show him these references. And, you know, one of the reasons they tell you to do lesson plans, even though you're not required to do lesson plans, is it just makes it easier to organize. So I made sure I had my lesson plans. They were all out, and I had notes on my lesson plans as to things I need to make sure to touch on. And so for me, you know, we started off with just fundamentals of instructions. And on my fundamentals of instructions, he asked me just about instructor responsibilities and professionalism. Then he had me touch a little bit on some of the hierarchies of, you know, basically just, you know, when you talk about like your what they call it, the Haslow's hierarchies of needs. So talking about making sure that people feel safe, that they're fed, that they're, you know, in the mood to learn. After that, we went into what was it? He had me teach on, what did we talk about? We talked about what do they call it? We talked about runway incursions. So in runway incursions, I just broke it down into several categories, because, you know, there's a lot to runway incursions. He even told me, he was like, if I start yawning, don't think that you're teaching it wrong. He's like, just be aware, it's a very big and boring subject, and I've heard it all, so just keep teaching it. And he's listening for the key information. And so he was just like, hey, make sure, you know, don't be afraid to look over your lesson plan, so that you don't miss anything. And that's exactly what I did. I had my lesson plan with me, and I went through all the bullet points, and my lesson plan literally was just the PTS, you know, it literally just said, cover this, cover this, cover this, cover this. And so that's what I did. You know, it took me maybe for each subject, we went about 45 minutes to an hour for each subject. And yeah, so whenever I didn't remember anything, I just literally, I'm like, okay, let me make sure I'm not giving you the incorrect information. Let me just check my notes real quick. And he was really cool with that. After that, he had me teach, what was it? After runway incursions, he had me teach the maneuver with chandals. So he had me teach chandals. And again, just really broke it down to its simple parts, referenced, you know, the constant bang, constant pitch sections, made sure I referenced. Now, you can just directly talk about the common student errors. I just kind of put it in there. So like, for example, I say, okay, so you're going to start off at about 105 knots. You're going to go ahead and put in that 30 degrees. And he goes, and be careful when you're putting in that 30 degrees, make sure you're coordinated. Students tend to be uncoordinated. They tend to not put in enough left rudder or put in too much right rudder. They tend to not put in enough power or turn slowly when they're doing it. So be careful of that. So I kind of integrated it into each step as I was explaining. And then, so then I'm like, okay, then you're going to go ahead and slowly put in that full power. And once you're putting in that slow power, you're going to slowly bank back. Don't be slow on the power. Make sure you're putting it in, relatively quickly. It's a maximum performance move. And be careful as you're putting in that pitch. As you're putting in that pitch, you're going to start slowing down. Make sure you put in that right rudder to stay coordinated. The higher that pitch is, the slower the speed is, the more coordinated, more right rudder you're going to have to put in, because that P factor is going to be pushing you. So I integrated my common student errors with the lesson instead of just having that bullet point. And just like any sort of lesson plan, I started with my objectives, and then I went directly into my completion standards. So you don't really have to make it that complicated. And I just had a nice simple cadence. I tried to integrate a couple lessons and a couple questions in there that I might ask a student, and I asked him as if he was a student, and he was cool with that. He was like, it was nice that I kept him engaged and kept him as part of the lesson. Then after that, we got back, we did our flight, we got back, and he was more than happy to give me my certificate. So that was really cool. After that, I actually, started throwing out applications. Funny enough, I threw out more applications to fly than I did to teach. So, like I went to a specific, mom and pop Part 61 for my private. So I applied there, and they were like, yeah, they like to have people with a little more hours. So I started throwing out applications to a few schools, but more than the schools, I started throwing out more applications. So like I threw out an application to Boutique and to Dynamic Air and Raven, a couple of these ones where they want you to have more hours. Like I only have like around 340 hours right now, where a lot of them, they want you to have 500 hours, but the 500 hours is more of an insurance thing than it is a regulatory thing. So some of them will actually look at you if you don't have the hours, but you have CFI, and they'll prefer that. So I started throwing out more applications for that. And then I got a call back from some buddies over there at Compton Flying Club, who I talked to prior to getting my CFI. I talked to them, met them through the Black Pilots Association. And they were like, yeah, they had a couple guys that were getting ready to leave because they were going to the airlines. So they were going to be in need of some flight instructors. So they were like, once you finish, come on back and, talk to them. And so I did an interview with them, and they offered me, a contract position, being part-time CFI. So right now I'm just waiting for them to finish processing my paperwork. And then I have to do a flight with their chief CFI. And once he signs me off, then I got a job working as a CFI. So I'm surprised it came so quickly, but as soon as I was done, I posted on Facebook to my friends and family and all that stuff, and to some local groups that, hey, finish my stuff, and that I wanted to stay fresh. So if anybody needed ground, just hit me up. And literally within one night of posting that, I've got like 3 or 4 messages of people, hey, I'm flying through these guys, but they don't like to do ground. Can you help me with my ground? And so I'm like, all right, look, we can Zoom, and, maybe I'll charge like $30, $40, and we can just Zoom and go over any subjects that you need help with. And doing that's pretty fun. What I found doing that was there were a lot of subjects that I thought, would be difficult, that I forget that students are completely new at it, For example, I was surprised that there were so many students that I've talked to that didn't know the basic airworthiness information. And you're just like, wow, this was so basic that I don't even think about it. It's just so easy for me to spit it out, because it was like every day. Every day we checked our aero. Every day we checked AV8. Every day we made sure we had our medical, or we had our ID and our pilot certificate on us. But for a completely new person, this information that you consider as basic, that you just know off the top of your head, is completely new to them. So it's pretty neat to realize that, yeah, you were at one time somebody who knew nothing, and this information that now you're a commercial pilot, a CFI, is completely new to them and is vital to keeping them abreast on it. You know, um, I don't. So it's pretty fun, just in that sense. You know, I have a student that he's getting ready to go take his written. It's all we're finishing off reviewing his PLT codes, and so he'll go and take his written, and I hope he passes. So that'll be fun. You know, I have another student who is working on his solo, and so once he knocks out his solo, he'll be going right in for his practicals. So I'm helping him with it, you know, getting his logs done and getting his helping him with knocking out that cross country. And you know, it's real fun to just kind of get with those students and just be like, hey, you know, I know you're afraid. I know this seems like tons of information, but hey, just remember those key phrases. You know, those acronyms will save your life. Even if you don't remember all of what the parts of the acronym, you know, just remembering the acronym will get you in the right direction. And I think another one is re-encouraging your students to know that they don't have to know everything. There's a lot of information. If they don't know it, just as important as it is to know it, it's important to know where to look it up. You know, a lot of people will give their students a checklist. They'll give their students a bunch of you know, PDFs of stuff to tell them to study, but they have to remember that if they go to a check ride and the examiner may ask them, hey, where'd you get this information from? If they don't even know what a PHAC or, you know, the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge is, or what part of the FAR aim to look it up, that's not going to look good on them, you know? So, you know, today I had a lesson. We were talking about airworthiness and the requirements for an aircraft to fly, VFR requirements. And I'm like, hey, just remember 205, 91 205. If you don't remember, just remember 91 is always going to be your rules for keeping your license, the important rules. So just remember VFR 205, right? VFR 205. Boom. So if you ever forget and you're like, hey, it's going to be day VFR the requirements, so it's going to be day VFR 205. And even if he doesn't remember every single part of the A tomato flames, he at least knows where to look it up, and that right there is going to help him. So yeah, that was my experience for CFI. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and leave it down in the comments. You know, if you guys are ever in LA and you want to do an exploratory flight, if you're interested in getting into aviation, hit me up and we can go fly, you know. And I'll talk to you guys later.